Hey there! Is today your first time here? Or maybe your first time in a while? If so, maybe you're wondering exactly who we are and what this church is all about. Well, we'd like you to know that we're a group of ordinary people who are on an amazing journey together, following Christ. Our guide is the Bible because it's the divinely inspired Word of God, and it will never take us in the wrong direction. Along the way, we hope you'll see that we are welcoming and spiritually passionate, and that getting to know you is a big deal to us. We know that the road is rough sometimes, but we'll work really hard to bring you practical and relevant messages to equip and encourage you through life's ups and downs. We want you to know that we care about this community, and we believe that it's our job to make it a better place. So, no matter who you are or where you've been, we're glad you're here with us today, and we hope that you'll join us on our journey, following Christ and living out His plan for us. So, welcome to church.
Well, good morning and welcome again to Sunday School. We appreciate, again, all of those that have been consistent. I want to keep saying for all of 2021, but now we are 15 days into 2021. This year is moving like last year. I won't say it's going faster because the time is still the same. The clock just don't stop. And so here we are now in another lesson, a second lesson for the new year. And the subject of our lesson today is justice and fairness. Justice and fairness. Many of us, I'm sure, in our lives have dealt with injustice that we talked about last week. And many of us have dealt with justice. But quite a few have experienced unfairness as opposed to being fair. For those that are visiting for the first time, my name is Ricky Pitts and I'll be your Sunday School teacher for today. I'm teaching on behalf of True Deliverance Holiness Church, where Bishop Nolan T. Torbert is the pastor, the founder, and the overseer. I'm going to jump right in with about 3 opening questions that we'd like you to think about as we go throughout this lesson today. And those that are in class this morning, we plan to have a dialogue on these 3 questions. Number 1 is there any harm in just lying every now and then? I guess they call those telling a little white lie, a little no harm lie. Number 2, how do you resist the temptation to just go along with an evil crowd? To go along with the majority of what they're doing is evil. How do you resist that temptation? Number 3, what can we do to have a better balance between work and rest? When do we know when to just shut it down and rest? And when do we know to go full throttle and work? I want y'all to think about that because this is going to create a lot of real good dialogue today. We've learned the 5 books of law, the 12 books of history, the 5 books of poetry, the 5 major prophets, and the 12 minor prophets, and 39 books in the Old Testament. Now we're going to the New Testament with the first 4 Gospels and the 1 book of history of the New Testament, which is Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. So we'd like you to learn those first 5 books for the next Sunday. And today. And we'll get into the next set of books in the New Testament the next Sunday. So again, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the book of Acts. So let's jump right into our lesson today. Part 1 deals with justice in court and home. This is Exodus chapter 23 in the first 8 verses. That's broken down in 3 categories. Rules of due process is in part 1, that's verses 1 through 3, due process. Letter B is helping the enemy. And the third part is rules of due process, part 2. And so the first three verses deal with rules of due process, part one. And it says, thou shalt not raise a false report. Put not thine hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. Verse 2, thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil. Neither shalt thou speak in a cause to decline after many to wrest judgment. The third verse, neither shalt thou countenance a poor man in his cause. Now, a little commentary on all three of these verses. The first verse, giving a false report in court is called perjury, which is lying in the court, lying under oath. And this part of the verse gives a general command against lying under oath and lying in order to hurt another person. And I want you to read about this in Exodus chapter 20, verse 16, and Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 20. The second part of this verse forbids, really outlaws, conspiring, coming together with others in order to harm or to hurt a third party. We're going to come together, so because we want to hurt this third party, want to hurt this person over here, so let's collude together. And that kind of attitude really cripples a justice system. And it leads to even more conflict and even more violence. When a legal system is corrupt, everybody eventually is going to suffer. And I want you to read 1 Kings 21, verse 8 through 14, and Matthew 26, verses 59 and 60. Now in verse 2, in ancient Israel, correct behavior was not determined by what everybody else did, what the crowd was doing. Then this crowd mentality, as it's called, it keeps common prejudices alive. It keeps common prejudices, blood running in their veins of that attitude. And it denies the divinely determined rights that others already have. I want you to read about this and read this as a reference in Acts chapter 7, verses 57 through 58, and chapter 17 and verse 5. The Hebrew word translated, we see the word decline in this verse, is translated rest. And the verb is used by ancient Greek translation. It occurs several times in the ancient Greek translation. But I want to read some references in the New Testament. As a matter of fact, let's read Romans 3 and 12. They are all gone out of the way. They are together become unprofitable. There's none that doeth good, no, not one. Romans 16 and 17, now I beseech thee, brethren, mark them which cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine which you have learned, and avoid them. Then 1 Peter 3:11, let him eschew evil and do good, let him seek peace and ensue it. This ain't something that just comes natural. We got to seek peace and ensue peace. Now, this word risk implies a departure or a turning of some sort. So it has to be an intentional effort as it relates to doing good. It has to be on purpose. It has to be, again, intentional. It's not natural for the human being just to do good. In the third verse commentary, judges must decide on their cases solely on the evidence. Leviticus 19 and 15 repeats the verb that's translated countenance, affirming the flip side of the coin, which is that judges were not to honor the high and mighty. Just give them props or give them honor because of who they were and because of the power that they had in the community or in the state or even in a country setting, in a national setting, but had to give them the same kind of justice. But I heard somebody say, a lawyer say, that you're gonna get just as much justice as you can afford to pay for. And it's sad that that is the case in our current legal system, but often that is the case. The second part of this, part one of our lesson, is helping the enemy. Verse 4 and 5. If thou meet thine enemy's ox or his ass going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him again. If thou see the ass of him that hated thee lying under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help him, thou shalt surely help with him. Now, the commentary on verse 4, even when a person was hated, the Israelites were taught not to hate and not to be vindictive in return to this person that hate them. And at that time in history, at this time in history, donkeys were used for plowing. They were used for threshing. They were used for the dung was used for fuel. Really, their feces were used. Somehow they dried it out and they burned it and used it for fuel. And they were also used for transportation, just et cetera, just used for a whole lot of reasons. And so they were very necessary. And so for a poor farming family, the loss of a donkey would create a substantial financial hardship. I mean, it's almost like if you work and there's a distance from your job, your car is pretty important. If you're in the city, a big city, the transportation system is pretty important for you because it helps you to get to work on time, and which is to get a paycheck every week, every 2 weeks, or once a month, and to pay your water bill, light bill, gas bill, food for your family, provide for your future. This is well, donkeys were extremely important back at that time because 98% of the people were farmers, and they relied on that. And so then the residents of a farming village, they had to help each other, not just to flourish, but to survive. And they had to show the love and they had to show the holiness of God to one another. And they had to help their enemies. This was in the legal system. Oh my goodness. You know, the Bible, well, we learned, Jesus picked it up and said, love thine enemy. Those that despitefully use you and hate you and say all kind of bad things about you. Love them. Boy, that's a whole nother side, ain't it? So in verse 5a, we see that the law outlined 4 phases of a decision-making process. Number 1 was spotting. So when they spotted the animal in a difficult situation, they saw it. Number 2 was realizing that the animal belonged to an enemy. Number 3 was checking one's own motives. What am I about to do, and why am I about to do it? And number 4 was deciding to help despite the underlying personal relationship. Boy, you know what, class? That's being the bigger person. And that is not easy to do. I don't care what nobody say. Now listen, that ain't easy to do. That takes some changing, some thinking. It takes some really a whole nother paradigm, a whole different way of looking at things. But this is what we are called to do as Christians. So no matter how tempted the offended person was to avoid helping an enemy, the concern and the welfare of the animal and the peace of the community and for honoring God all dictated that this person should give assistance to the animal that belonged to an enemy. Boy, we got some growing up to do. Now, I understand we're not under the law anymore, but we see a lot of principles and things we can learn from these verses here in Exodus, and we're gonna be here for a minute. Now, in the second part of that 5th verse, Jesus went on, and I mentioned this earlier, to build on this law and on similar laws in his dispute about doing good on the Sabbath. So then, if the adversaries of Jesus will pull out a trapped animal that's got stuck in in a pit and they pulled him out on the Sabbath day, the question is, how much more should they be willing to help a fellow human being that's in a rough situation on the Sabbath day? Boy, Jesus really made them think. Because, people have a double standard. They see one thing as being okay and something else as not being okay when they feel they can trap a person in their ideology, in their way of thinking. So now, in the third part of our first part of our lesson, in justice in court and at home, we see rules of due process, part 2. Thou shalt not rest the judgment of thy poor in his cause. Keep thee far from a false matter, and the innocent and righteous slay thou not. For I will not justify the wicked. Verse 8, and thou shalt take no gift. Listen to this. For the gift blinded the wise and perverted the words of the righteous. So God's rule then is very clear that anyone involved in a dispute had to be fair without any regard to their social economic status. Had to be fair. And that this is in regards to the poor. They didn't have a whole lot of money. They didn't have no social prestige. And people are often inclined to get very close to the line that separates the truth from lying. They get close to that. They don't cross it, but sure enough get close to that line that separates the truth from telling a lie. But the law required that the Israelites to stay away from that kind or any kind of deception. And verse 7 then also reminds us of the potential for abusive situations to escalate. People will try to get back at you. If you do people wrong, it's, sometimes, and you've seen it, they can only take so much. Or maybe I shouldn't say they can, they decided to only take so much, and that thing escalates and somebody ends up getting hurt or even killed. God extended mercy to Israel by delivering them from Egyptian bondage. And so then the Israelites should have been, and they were very familiar with giving mercy. And they should be as familiar with receiving mercy. Or I should reverse that. They were very familiar with receiving mercy, and they should be as familiar with what? Giving mercy. We tend to reverse that. We're familiar with Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. But what about giving mercy? So God ain't gonna make cheap his gift of redemption by turning a blind eye to wickedness. God is going to deal with wickedness because wickedness has consequences. They have divine consequences. Wickedness also has, earthly consequences. So if the legal system in this old pilgrim land, this old barren land that we are just pilgrims passing through, has a justice system, what about God? I'd like y'all to read Matthew 18, verse 23 to 35. Now, in verse 8, we see bribery is coming on the scene. And bribery can be thought of in the justice system as buying justice. As I mentioned earlier, some folks are going to get just as much justice as they can afford to buy. Bribery exists, class. And the recipient of the bribery could go as far as guaranteeing the death or the conviction of the innocent person. I guarantee you, I'm gonna put him away, or he gonna get killed. Bribery is evil personified. It's evil on an entirely different level. I want y'all to read Deuteronomy chapter 27 and 25 as part of your notes. So bribery then goes on to corrupt the very character of the ones that are involved. It corrupts who they are. It corrupts the soul of a man. Bribery is a dangerous thing. And there are some folks that's so hungry for money that they'll say anything, do anything, accept anything to get it. And not thinking about the consequences that they're going to have to deal with when people find out what really happened and find out. Anyway, so then a judge that's receiving a bribe abandons the very qualification that for being a judge. And what's that qualification? Wisdom. Not just information, not just knowledge, but wisdom, which is knowledge guided by understanding. And they got to operate at the highest integrity and the highest character. And a system then that tolerates that kind of behavior sooner or later, and sometimes sooner than later, is going to decay into conflict, and it's going to build a solid building of distrust. And when a person loses trust in anybody, particularly in a legal system, it's a recipe for a disaster. So let's go to part two. We're about to run out of time here. Justice in economic matters. And we have broken down in three categories. One is care for the migrants, or I could say immigrants. It's B is the sabbatical year, and C, the Sabbath day. Now, in letter A, verse 9, the care for the migrants. Also, thou shalt not oppress a stranger, for ye know the heart of a stranger, seeing ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. So a little commentary on verse 9. In ancient Israel, the extended family provided for the financial, the physical, and the emotional support for their members. But the immigrant or the migrant didn't have any kind of support system. So so laws were put in place and had to be put in place in order to protect the migrant. And because Israel's collective memory centered around Egyptian bondage, they had to show compassion for the people that was in vulnerable situations, not forgetting where the Lord had brought them from. Anybody know anybody? Let me say it that way. That have forgotten where the Lord has brought you from. Because now you're sitting in a cushion chair. Now you're living in a high rise, or you have an office with a window. And you got folks that you tell one to go and one to come, and you can point and click. Forget about at one time you didn't have, well, you know what they say, windows to throw it out of. You know what they say, So anyway, ain't gonna get into all that. So don't forget it. Don't forget where the Lord has brought you from. Now, a legal case between a stranger and an Israelite was to be judged as if it was a legal case against two Israelites. No distinction between the two. It was against the law to mistreat an immigrant or migrant. You know how some folks do right now with immigrants that come to our country. They treat them like they ain't human. They coming over here. They taking our job. Well, some of the main ones are saying they taking our jobs. You don't want to do the jobs that they do. And if you do it, you're going to show up late. Or ain't going to be on time. Or going to half do it. And ain't going to work when it's cold. Ain't going to work on Saturday. And they don't just... Well, you know what? Let me go on, because I'm going to make somebody probably a little upset here. But those that didn't treat folks right, there were divine threats as well. Divine threats. Not just legal threats of the land. I want you to read Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 16. Now, also in the second part, we see that the sabbatical year, verse 10 and 11. And 6 years thou shalt sow thy seed, and thou shalt gather in the fruit thereof. But the 7th year thou shalt let it rest and lie still, that the poor of thy people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field shall eat. In like manner thou shalt deal with thy vineyard and with thy olive yard. So we got a lot of different interpretations then on these verses that's cleared up in Leviticus chapter 25, verses 1 through 7. I want you to read that. which is like a commentary on the earlier text. We learned this in our commentary. Leviticus forbade or outlaws sowing any seed in the 7th year. The owners of the land should have already stored up a year's worth of food for their families, allowing any surpluses to go to the poor, those that didn't have any land. So this kind of speaks to us on the importance of preparation and planning and looking down the road. And we can go a long ways on this text here, but the time would not permit. And the last part of verse 11 closes a possible loophole in the law. So that not only the fields, but also the vineyards, the olive yard, the olive groves, none of those should be harvested in that 7th year. So these were the 3 major food sources, and it made up the core of the Israelite diet. This is what they ate, this is what they drink. And the 3 major food sources were pretty important. So they had to rely then on God's generosity for their food supply and for all their supplies. And they had to keep the law. And what was that going to do? They was going to be able to live then in unity, regardless to the social economic status of the elite and those that were poor. They all had to live in harmony, because you know why? They all had to lean and depend on the Lord. The song says, I will trust in the Lord until I die. And they all had to lean on him. I don't care what they were or what they had. And then we got the next part, the Sabbath day, verse number 12. It says, 6 days thou shalt work. 6 days shalt thou do work. And on the 7th day thou shalt rest, that thine ox and thine ass may rest, and the son of thy handmaid and the stranger may be refreshed. Now, commentary on verse number 12. Verse 12 does not give a justification for the law. In other words, God is God, and when He gives a command or gives a statute, gives an instructive, He don't have to tell you, okay, this is why I'm doing that. This is why I come. This is how I come. No, He's God. So He don't have to justify why He says we should do something, because He knows the end from the beginning. He knows He's Alpha and Omega. He's the beginning and the end. He's omnipotent. He's omnipresent. He's omniscient. He know everything. He got all the power, and He everywhere. Ain't that something? So elsewhere is justified by referring to the creation or to God's deliverance of Israel. Nor does it command the recipient's family to rest. That kind of goes without saying. So this points to the fact then that the 10 Commandments, despite its concision, it ain't a whole lot in the 10 Commandments. It's kind of concise, but it's jam-packed with very important details for living. And we got to listen to this, class. We got to dig it out. We got to decode it, because it's coded with all the details for life and for living, for preparing and retiring. I don't even think retiring is in the Bible, right? But it prepares us it prepares us. It's all in the 10 Commandments. So then the son of a secondary wife, as well as the stranger living with the family, all had the right to rest, just as much as the citizens of Israel had the right to rest. We're talking about due process. We're talking about the legal system. We're talking about justice and fairness. We understand that the time is always right to do what's right. Justice and fairness. We might not always get along with those that we love, and we got to love everybody. Black, white, red, and yellow. We might not ever all agree to the same political. We don't have all the same political ideals and agreements and philosophies and ideologies. We don't believe with every political doctrine. But one thing we got to agree on is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. We got to agree on that. and we got to love one another. If we can't, and we got to agree to disagree on other natural subjects or subjects of the land, but we got to agree to love one another as Christian brothers and sisters. And that's in every nationality, wherever we are, whoever we are. We got to love one another, class. I want to bring this thing to a close here in the conclusion. I'm going to kind of quote from the commentary, as I've done throughout this whole lesson. There are 613 laws in the Old Testament, and they still don't address every imaginable circumstance. But they lay out specific examples which allow us then to pull on our common sense. You know, they call it mother wit. To pull on the common sense to figure out how to act in any situation that's not necessarily specifically or explicitly or clearly spelled out. Just use some common sense. We got to use some common sense. The law of Moses was a reflection, invites reflection. I want you to look into the mirror of your life, Ricky. I want you to see and judge what's right and wrong and the consequences of either one. It invites us to reflect, to look it over. And so then those following this system, those following a legal system of any sort, is going to ask questions that's going to shape the commitments, and that's going to shape the attitudes, not for a quarter, not for a semester, not for a year, but for a lifetime. The decisions that we make, the commitments that we make, the attitudes that we display, the way we look at things, the way we deal with things, is going to determine our outcome for our lifetime, class. So we have got to really think about this justice and fairness, and about due process, and understanding the legal system. And all of us should have an internal legal system in our lives, an internal compass to know right from wrong. I think we all have it, but we tend to override it. And there are consequences to overriding doing what's right, because can't nobody see us. The time is always right to do what's right, class. Look, y'all have a great rest of the day. We're out of time. Thank you for your time today, and we'll see you hopefully next Sunday at the same time. Take care.